Somewhere on the internet right now, there are approximately 6.5 billion cat images, more than one for every human being alive. Cats are the most photographed, most shared, most memed creature in the history of recorded media. And we have been obsessed with them, in one form or another, for at least 10,000 years. Here's what nobody tells you about that obsession. The cat has never once been domesticated. Not in the way a dog has been domesticated, or a horse, or a cow. Every other domestic animal was selectively bred over generations to serve human needs, shaped, modified, made dependent. The cat did something entirely different. It simply decided that humans were useful, moved in on its own terms, and has been running the arrangement ever since. The animal you think of as a pet is, by every meaningful biological measure, still a wild predator that tolerates your presence in exchange for food and warmth. And it has used that arrangement to spread itself to every continent on Earth except Antarctica, making it one of the most successful invasive species in the history of the planet and the single deadliest predator of birds and small mammals that has ever existed in North America. This is the real history of the cat, and it is not the story of an animal that was tamed. It's the story of an animal that domesticated us. The story begins not with Egypt, which is where everyone assumes it begins, but in the Fertile Crescent, roughly 10,000 years ago, in the agricultural settlements of the ancient Near East. This timing is not a coincidence. Around 10,000 years ago, something happened that changed the trajectory of human civilization permanently. People stopped moving. The transition from nomadic hunter-gatherer life to settled agricultural communities meant, for the first time in human history, that large quantities of grain were being stored in one place for extended periods. And stored grain, in any era, means one thing above everything else: rats and mice. The wildcats of the Near East, specifically a subspecies called Felis sylvestris libica, the African wildcat, were already living around the edges of human settlements, attracted by exactly the same thing the humans were trying to protect their grain from. The rodents came for the stored food. The cats came for the rodents. And the humans, watching this happen, did something that fundamentally changed the cat's trajectory. They didn't drive the cats away. That decision, or more precisely, that non-decision, that passive tolerance, is the entire foundation of cat domestication. Nobody captured a wildcat and bred it into something softer and more manageable. Nobody trained it to do a job. The cat assessed the situation, identified the benefit, and moved closer to humans at a pace entirely of its own choosing. The cats that were slightly more tolerant of human proximity got more access to prey. Over generations, slightly more tolerant cats passed on slightly more tolerant offspring. The humans never drove the selection. The cats did, by choosing which human settlements to inhabit. The earliest physical evidence of this relationship is extraordinary in its specificity. On the island of Cyprus, archaeologists found a grave dating to approximately 9,500 years ago. A human burial, carefully arranged, with a small wildcat buried alongside the person, in the same orientation, with the same deliberate positioning. Cyprus has no native wildcats. The only way a cat gets to Cyprus 9,500 years ago is if a human brought it there, on a boat, intentionally. Someone valued that cat enough to carry it across open water, and then valued it enough to bury it beside them when they died. That's not pest control. That's already something else. By the time cats arrived in ancient Egypt, probably around 4,000 years ago, significantly later than most people assume, the relationship had already been developing for thousands of years. But Egypt is where it transformed into something that has no real parallel in the history of any other domestic animal. The Egyptians didn't just tolerate cats or find them useful. They worshipped them. The goddess Bastet, originally depicted as a lioness, later softened into a domestic cat, was one of the most widely venerated deities in the Egyptian pantheon, associated with protection, fertility, and the home. Cats were kept in temples. They were mummified in enormous numbers. Archaeologists have found cat cemeteries containing hundreds of thousands of mummified animals, so many that in the 19th century, excavated cat mummies were shipped to England by the ton and ground up for agricultural fertilizer, a detail that says something genuinely uncomfortable about how the modern world relates to ancient reverence. Killing a cat in ancient Egypt. even accidentally, was punishable by death. When a household cat died, the family shaved their eyebrows as a sign of mourning and didn't stop mourning until the eyebrows grew back. There are accounts of Egyptian soldiers in the field being psychologically manipulated by enemies who knew this. Persian forces reportedly held cats in front of their shields as they advanced on Egyptian positions, knowing that Egyptian soldiers would be unable to bring themselves to attack anything that might harm the cats. The Egyptians also tried very hard to keep cats exclusively within Egypt. Export was officially prohibited. The cat was considered a national treasure, a divine gift, not a commodity to be traded to foreigners. But cats, being cats, paid no attention to this policy. They went wherever they found advantage in going. Greek and Roman traders brought them back from Egyptian ports. Phoenician merchants carried them on ships across the Mediterranean. By the time the Roman Empire was at its height, cats had spread across the entire known world. Not because anyone decided to spread them, but because cats had discovered that ships were full of rats, and ships went everywhere. While all of this was happening in the West, the cat was following a completely parallel but separate trajectory in the East. And the Eastern story is stranger than almost anyone knows. In China, a different species of wild cat, not the African wildcat that became the domestic cat of the West, but the leopard cat, a spotted species native to East Asia, was independently being domesticated at around the same time in the agricultural communities of ancient China. Archaeologists studying 5,000-year-old sites in China's Shaanxi province found remains of what appeared to be tamed leopard cats, eating the same food as the humans who lived there, buried in some cases alongside them. For a period, it looked as though the cat might have been domesticated twice, independently, on opposite sides of the world. It didn't last. The leopard cat domestication experiment in China eventually failed, or rather, was replaced. Sometime during the Han Dynasty, or the period following its collapse, the Western domestic cat arrived in China along the Silk Road, most likely brought by Buddhist monks who used cats to protect their sacred texts from rodents. The first confirmed evidence of the Western domestic cat in China dates to around 730 CE. The leopard cat experiment faded out, the African wildcat's descendants, the cats that had once been forbidden from leaving Egypt, had traveled across the known world and arrived in China anyway. Japan's relationship with cats is its own remarkable chapter. Cats arrived in Japan from China, probably in the 6th century CE, again through the connection with Buddhism. The earliest written record of a cat in Japan appears in the diary of Emperor Uda in 889 CE, a detailed, affectionate description of a small black cat given to him as a gift, which he found so remarkable and so beautiful that he wrote about it with what can only be described as genuine delight. That diary entry is one of the oldest pieces of writing about a domestic cat that reads unmistakably like something a modern cat owner might post online. For centuries in Japan, cats were so rare and so valuable that they were kept exclusively by the nobility and were not allowed to roam freely. They lived on leashes, essentially, precious objects as much as animals. It wasn't until the 10th century that cats began to be kept more widely, and not until much later that they became genuinely common. When they did, they fit seamlessly into a culture that had developed a sophisticated appreciation for the aesthetic of the small, the quiet, and the independent. The maneki neko, the beckoning cat figurine now found in shop windows and restaurants across East Asia and beyond, emerged from Japanese folk tradition, where the cat was associated with good fortune. The same animal that medieval Europe was burning in cages was, in Japan, a symbol of prosperity waving customers in from the street. And then something went very wrong. The medieval period in Europe is where the history of the cat takes its darkest and strangest detour. And it's also where a story you've almost certainly heard needs to be untangled from the actual historical record, because the popular version isn't quite true. Here's what you've probably heard. Pope Gregory IX, in 1233, issued a papal bull called Vox in Rama that declared black cats to be the embodiment of Satan. European Christians, terrified of witchcraft and demonic influence, began massacring cats across the continent. The cat population collapsed. The rat population exploded. And the resulting surplus of plague-carrying rats is why the Black Death of 1347 was so catastrophic, killing between a third and a half of Europe's entire population. It's a compelling narrative. It has a satisfying, ironic logic. Humans' religious hysteria accidentally removed the one animal that could have saved them. And it's almost entirely wrong. The vox in Rama was real. Gregory IX issued it in 1233. But a careful reading of the actual document reveals something different from the popular story. It was addressed specifically to a German bishop, about a specific sect of heretics in a specific region of Germany who were reportedly venerating a statue of a black cat in their rituals. The bull condemned the heretical sect. It did not declare all cats to be instruments of Satan. It did not call for a continental massacre of cats. It did not, despite what thousands of internet articles claim, function as a papal death warrant for European cat populations. Cats did have a difficult time in medieval Europe. The association between cats and witchcraft was real and persistent, particularly for black cats. Cat burning became a documented folk practice in parts of France, connected to certain seasonal festivals. The treatment of cats in the medieval period was often brutal by modern standards. But the idea that this resulted in a continent-wide population collapse of cats, significant enough to cause the Black Death, is not supported by the historical evidence. And several serious historians have pointed out that the story keeps getting repeated precisely because it feels satisfying, not because it's documented. The actual mechanism of the Black Death was rats and fleas, yes. But the plague's severity was driven by factors far more complex than a cat shortage. The disease moved along trade routes. It thrived in the conditions of medieval urban poverty. It was amplified by malnutrition, by overcrowding, by the absence of anything resembling germ theory or effective quarantine. Cats, had there been more of them, would not have stopped it. What the medieval period did do to the cat was reshape its cultural meaning permanently in Western Europe. The association between cats, particularly black cats, and malevolent supernatural forces took root during this period and has never entirely left. The superstition about black cats bringing bad luck persists in some countries to this day. The cat went from a divine animal in Egypt to a suspected agent of Satan in France within about 2,000 years, while being essentially the same creature throughout. The Age of Discovery restored the cat's fortunes in the most literal possible sense. As European powers sent ships across the Atlantic, around Africa, and into the Pacific, the cat came with them. Not as a passenger, but as a crew member. Rats were one of the most serious threats to any long ocean voyage, capable of destroying food stores and gnawing through the wooden structures of the ship itself. Cats were the solution. They were standard equipment on European sailing vessels by the 16th century, as essential as rope and sailcloth. This is how the domestic cat reached the Americas, Australia, New Zealand, and the islands of the Pacific. Not through any deliberate introduction program, but as working animals on ships, jumping off at ports and spreading into environments they had never been part of before. Cats arrived with Columbus. They arrived with the settlers at Jamestown. They arrived on the Mayflower. And here is where the story of the cat intersects with one of the most significant and least discussed ecological crises in the modern world. Every environment the cat entered, particularly every island environment, had evolved without a predator like it. The birds of New Zealand had developed over millions of years with no mammalian predators at all. The same was true across the Pacific, in parts of Australia, across the Caribbean. These species had no inherited fear response to a small, fast, silent predator that could climb, that hunted by instinct regardless of hunger, that could kill dozens of animals in a single night, even when it had no intention of eating them. The results have been catastrophic and ongoing. The IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, lists the domestic cat among the 100 worst invasive species on Earth. Globally, domestic cats have contributed to the extinction of at least 63 species of birds, mammals, and reptiles. In the United States alone, free-ranging domestic cats kill between 1.3 and 4 billion birds every single year, making them the single greatest source of human-caused bird mortality in the country, exceeding cars, buildings, and wind turbines combined. The Stevens Island wren, a small, flightless bird native to a single island off New Zealand, is the most frequently cited example of what a cat can do in an environment that has no defenses against one. The species was first documented by a lighthouse keeper in 1894, and within months, the lighthouse keeper's cat had driven it to extinction. One cat, one island. One species gone forever, within a year of being discovered. There is a genuine, ongoing scientific debate about how to respond to this. In Australia, which has some of the most severe cat-related wildlife losses on Earth, the government has implemented large-scale feral cat culling programs that generate enormous public controversy, because the animal responsible for wiping out endangered native species is also the animal that roughly 30% of Australian households keep as a beloved pet, the same creature. Two completely different relationships with humans, existing simultaneously. But to understand how the cat made the final leap from the barnyard and the cargo hold directly into our bedrooms, you have to look at the 19th century. Because before the Victorian era, the concept of a house cat didn't really exist. You had working cats and you had stray cats. The idea of keeping a predator inside a carpeted home purely for companionship was considered an absurd, unsanitary luxury. Then came the Industrial Revolution. As millions of people poured out of rural fields and into cramped, soot-choked Western cities, human psychology shifted. The natural world was being paved over, and a deep, collective nostalgia for nature took hold. The Victorians became obsessed with bringing a sanitized version of the wilderness indoors. They filled their parlors with ferns, taxidermy, and, eventually, cats. But a regular street cat wouldn't do for the high society drawing rooms of London or New York. The cat needed a branding makeover. In 1871, a man named Harrison Weir organized the world's first official cat show at the Crystal Palace in London. He drew up the very first standards for cat breeds, judging them on the symmetry of their markings, the cleanliness of their fur, and the grace of their movements. For the first time in 10,000 years, humans began doing to cats what they had done to dogs millennia prior, selectively breeding them for aesthetics rather than utility. We invented the Persian. We engineered the Siamese to be more elegant. We took a rugged, self-sufficient survivor and began turning it into a living ornament. Yet, even as we built this middle-class fantasy around them, the cat refused to fundamentally change. The Victorians wrote poems about their gentle, purring fireside companions, but those same companions were still slipping out the window at midnight to hunt with the exact same ruthless efficiency as their ancestors in the Egyptian desert. Humans changed the architecture around the cat. They changed the economy, the culture, and the class status of the cat. But they never changed the cat. The cat, today, is the most popular household pet in the world. There are estimated to be anywhere between 600 million and 1 billion domestic cats alive on Earth right now, a number that has roughly doubled in the last 40 years. They are on every continent except Antarctica. They have been to space. A French cat named Felicette was launched into orbit in 1963 and returned safely, the only cat to have ever done so. They generate more internet traffic than almost any other subject. They are the subject of an entire genre of viral video, multiple dedicated streaming channels, and a Broadway musical that ran for 18 years. And they are, still, not fully domesticated. Genetic analysis has confirmed what anyone who has ever tried to get a cat to do something it didn't want to do already knows intuitively. The domestic cat is remarkably similar, genetically, to its wild ancestor. Unlike dogs, which were selectively bred for 10,000 years into creatures of extraordinary behavioral variety, shaped to serve specific human purposes, cats were never subjected to strong selective breeding until very recently. The same genetic toolkit that helps a wildcat survive in the African savanna is still largely present in the cat sleeping on your sofa. Its hunting instinct doesn't switch off when it's well fed. Its territorial behavior doesn't disappear because it lives indoors. Its relationship with you is real, but it is not, and has never been, the relationship of dependence that defines true domestication. The cat chose this arrangement. It continues to choose it, moment by moment, on its own terms. The animal we think we own has been making the same independent calculation since a wildcat in ancient Israel first noticed that human grain stores were full of mice and decided to move closer. So here's what the cat actually is, once you clear away 10,000 years of reverence, superstition, viral videos, and comfortable myth. It is a wild predator that found humans useful and moved in. It spread itself across the planet by hitching rides on the most powerful transportation network available in each era. First trade ships, then colonial vessels, now the global pet trade. It was worshipped as a god in one civilization and systematically persecuted in another, and shrugged off both with equal indifference. It is currently driving species to extinction across multiple continents while simultaneously being the most beloved domestic animal in the world. And it has achieved all of this without ever fully giving up the wildness that made it useful in the first place. You didn't domesticate the cat found you. And if you look at the numbers, 1 billion animals, every continent, 10,000 years of successful cohabitation, and a species that still hasn't given up a single wild instinct. It's not entirely clear which one of you got the better deal. So, the next time you look down at the cat sleeping on your couch, or scroll past a video of one doing something ridiculous on your phone, remember what you're actually looking at. You aren't looking at a masterpiece of human domestication. You're looking at an evolutionary genius that figured out how to conquer the modern world without changing a single thing about who it is. If you enjoyed this deep dive into what actually happened in history, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who thinks they're the one in charge of their household. And I want to hear from you in the comments below. If cats never truly surrendered their wild instincts, do you think we actually domesticated them? Or did they just pull off the greatest, most comfortable trick in human history? What's the wildest, most predatory thing your pet has ever done? Let me know down below. Thanks for watching Deep Coast. I'll see you in the next one.